The people's deputies of the Ukrainian parliament were supposed to start the impeachment procedure. Do you know what I support above all? For an alliance between Ukraine and the United States, at least roughly following the model of Israel. Most of your audience are people who are not in Ukraine, the diaspora, so I'll explain for them now. Tell me, who is Praitula Besponda? A fifth-rate actor, pardon me, with crude, boorish humor on some minor Pinchuk channel. They believe people they dislike on YouTube should be dealt with. I saw a post from one person specifically. He says the SPU should deal with them under wartime law. For some reason, he doesn't mention handling Yermak, Umarov, or Mindish under wartime law.
Hello friends, this is the Continent Channel with Elena Prigova. And today, before we start our conversation with Denis Yelisevich, I want to let you know right away, please subscribe, share the video, and turn on your notifications. This is very important for spreading the information you receive on our channel and on Yelisevich's channel. Be sure to also subscribe to Denis's channel. In the description, you'll find all the information on where to subscribe. Hello, Denis.
Hello, Elena.
Hello, I'm following you. I'm monitoring, you could say, your activities. I admire what you do and how much energy you have to tilt at windmills. Sometimes I think of you as a Don Quixote. To what extent do you think this quixotic streak is part of who you are?
Definitely not a Don Quixote. I don't intend to take anything from the rich and give it to the poor, for one. Second, I don't think I'm tilting at windmills. Sometimes, of course, I do get that feeling, that impression. But I understood perfectly, first of all, what I was fighting against and what was behind it. No one was expecting an easy path or a sprint. This is a marathon.
Denis, what do you consider yourself to be?
I consider myself, first of all, an entrepreneur, and secondly, probably a political figure. Definitely not a politician, definitely not an activist or any of that.
What's the difference between a politician and a political figure?
Well, a politician, in my understanding, of course, a politician is someone whose job is a constant struggle for power. That means all his actions should be aimed at gaining power at any cost, with little to no moral considerations or principles. My life definitely isn't built around that. I mean, if I just wanted to force my way into some position, there were probably 1,000 chances, first before the war and second during the war, 1,000 other much easier ways. Not just easier, but much more profitable, I would say.
I completely understand your intention because you love Ukraine and you plan to return there. I really hope that your dream will come true someday, but I'm an optimist. You know, I'm actually more of a pessimist because a pessimist is just a well-informed optimist. I look at what's happening now and I don't understand the people who have been my friends all my life. We can speak in Ukrainian in some common language, but we're speaking different languages from different sides and with different perspectives on the situation. Lately, I'll just describe what's happening and you can comment on it. I became an American citizen 1,000,000 years ago. I swore allegiance to this country, not to Ukraine. Ukraine settled in my heart in 2014 and stayed there for good, starting from the first time the flag was raised. Even in the very beginning of 2014, it was already about helping. Constantly helping Ukraine with money. I made the latest donation. That was yesterday. But I can't give a cent more to the government. Today we're with Boris Palant. With this lawyer, Boris Palant, we were raising money for the hospitals again, and every cent will go to them. The amounts that have been raised over the past years total $500,000 US. And then I realized when we transfer money for specific needs to specific people, I want to remember how starting in 2014, I was sending diapers for the wounded because the diapers were being stolen. And then those diapers that we sent from here could end up at the market. When we deal with any organization connected to the government, I have absolutely no trust in it because they steal. And this pattern of theft has persisted in Ukraine for 12 years now. They steal. It sounds bitter, painful, frightening, and somehow hopeless. And at the same time, we do it because it's a calling of the heart, because it's humanitarian aid, because that's what it is. And there are so many of these reasons. You arrived almost 4 years ago. You saw all of this before, at a time when the war was already going on. Let me remind you, it started in 2014. By the way, we also raised funds for the Donbas Battalion and for the cyborgs and for medical treatment. And there's a whole list. Not to mention that I was paying to get people out of Bucha. I'm sorry. I apologize for this emotion. Because when you receive a photo of your friend, a doctor whose hands are tied and there's a hole in his head from being shot in the head, and you understand, and there are so many such requests, and you pay to get people out, you pay rescuers to get people out, to save people. And the question arises, the state? Where was the state at that moment that just took and abandoned its citizens who spoke Ukrainian to their fate? So explain to my American friends who are very disappointed and have just stopped helping. The neighborhood where I live, there are no Ukrainians in any of the houses here. They're Italians, Anglo-Saxons, Irish. The neighborhood where I live, every house had a Ukrainian flag. There were flags everywhere. I drove by the other day and I didn't notice a single flag. And that's an indicator of how Americans feel about what's happening. They've stopped believing. How do you explain to those who have lost faith? How do you explain to these people what's happening in Ukraine and why it's happening this way?
Well, this moment was bound to come, and now it has come, and it came much later than expected. I understand that it's connected to the feelings you've described. Look, there are a lot of reasons for this. First, someone instilled it. In the same way, using KGB methods like in Putin's Russia, Ukrainians have now also had their own version of those values instilled in them, just a little different, values in reverse. And now they think that the whole world is bad. In particular, they speak very negatively about America, not just about Donald Trump, but about America as a whole. And this kind of quality, this trait, I would even say, is that everyone owes us and everyone should love us. And if you deviate from this even by a millimeter at best, they will just insult you. A little worse, you're a Kremlin agent, a traitor, and everything else. In short, an enemy. And you've encountered this now. Here, the question can be explored even more broadly. In Ukraine, people don't really understand because what I call a loser mentality was instilled. They don't respect success. They don't respect success or understand what America is and how hard people work here. People pay taxes. And despite all that, people like you and me help a country that, with taxes like in Ukraine, should have been able to handle things on its own. If they couldn't, they should have ended the war earlier, for example, in 2022. That's what should have happened. But when I say things like this in our media landscape, of course, I irritate a lot of people and become an enemy and everything else. You mentioned the hospitalers. Of course, that's your personal business, but have you read about the investigation into the hospitalers? There's some conflict going on now. They haven't accounted for the money.
We work with an American. He's been there since the first day of the war. The American Stephen Cohen. And everything goes through him. He's a real person who's there, who helps, who trains. He's there in the war zone. He doesn't belong to any organization. He has a company through which everything goes registered in America. Everything is transparent down to the last cent. And that's why we check. We know where the money goes. We get an accounting for every cent. We don't deal with outfits like United for Ukraine or any other companies like that. And that's a separate topic altogether. We don't deal with them. In no way, not with any company connected to the government. I'm just saying this right away, sorry. Just a remark.
Yes, it will be interesting and clear for the viewers. So that's basically how things stand. Now is the perfect time. I'm being ironic. Actually, it should have been asked much earlier to ask the question, why is the war happening? Why is the war happening now? If we're talking about the first 5 months, let's say, of 2022, then this is a real existential war. But now we've learned, though I mostly understood everything before about this public scandal with the Mindich tapes. So, we've understood what the war is about. The war is being fought over the Firepoint company. Zelensky, the arms baron, is openly financed from all of this, and Zelensky's personal business and that of his friends is funded by Western aid. I call this Zelensky's defense industrial complex. That's all there is to it, but not everyone is convinced. Most people understand, yet propaganda pushes the opposite. Now they're saying, do you know why they're bringing this up? Ukraine is hitting Russia very hard right now, and things are going badly for Russia. So the Kremlin has already given the order to spread information about Firepoint. There used to be a joke, we steal, but it's for the sake of the war, for the sake of victory. Now this we steal for the sake of victory, we steal, but for victory has become real life. That's the kind of madness we've come to.
We steal for the sake of victory. That's normal. When we say that this has become the norm and stealing has become the norm, and it's like, excuse me for being blunt, but it's like you can lie right to their faces and they still swallow it. And because whatever we talk about, it instantly turns into this ping pong back and forth. You are enemies of the people. Psyop. I remember well how people shouted at us when we stood near the White House and asked for Lend-Lease, how they were shouting at everyone that we were a psyop. This was being spread by Ukraine's ambassador. She wasn't spreading it for no reason. She's probably connected to the president, probably connected to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. She's probably connected to someone, and she wasn't saying this on her own behalf, but she was persuading people. She said, don't go to them because that's an information psychological operation. That's the wrong diaspora. And every time you hear right and wrong, when someone gives you a label, you go and fight for Lend-Lease, and they label you, telling you who you are. And then Yermak appeared, who clearly said in July, this is an information psychological operation. That's not it at all. We don't need any of this. It was July of 2022. Back then, they completely trampled Victoria Sparks with absolute lies. And then we see all these characters, when people started saying, you're all feeding from the same trough, from the same swamp. They all came out of the Kvartal 95. How do you explain to people that it's all pizza, that they're helping the pizza, that they're helping those in the IPSO in Kiev who came to plunder the country? Let me remind you about the former Minister of Foreign Affairs. I'm not even talking about Umerov. How is it even possible for someone to have businesses and millions here? Will he fight for Ukraine? Or for his millions? His family is here, and most likely they all have the documents to stay. His family does, but he doesn't. You have to be an idiot to believe Markarova's fairy tales about real estate, about settling in the United States. They all have property. They all have property in the United States. And let me remind you, the Pandora Papers that came out at the beginning of 2022 with all the numbers and materials about Zelensky, none of that has disappeared. Just because people stop talking about it, it's like a child who covers their eyes and thinks no one can see them. That's how they play hide and seek. Please explain this to me. I really want to understand your perspective. You are not a citizen of the United States of America. I am a citizen. Aid comes from my taxes and the taxes of millions of Americans. This aid does not reach the recipients. How can we keep believing in a miracle that doesn't exist?
So I'm a resident of the United States and a taxpayer here, not anymore.
So it's your taxes that are being used?
Thank you. So
your taxes are being used for this?
Yes.
So we have the right to ask, where is the money, Zin?
We have the right, and here's a joke. While you were giving your whole speech, the joke is common sense has left the chat. This is one of those times when common sense is gone. Let me just give you the simplest wording that I came up with. If at the negotiating table, one of the main people in the delegation who talks to the Russians and the Americans in a trilateral or bilateral format, people who are in the arms business, who are mentioned in the documents, who say under no circumstances should it be stopped, I talked to the general there. He said that if the ceasefire or peace is concluded now, this special funding program will end. And we're talking, Elena, about an amount of, for example, 311 billion hryvnias, as stated in the documents. That's approximately almost $8 billion just for a single episode. That's an astronomical amount of money that was allocated for the weapons built by Zelensky's company. So what's the point for a person if his motivation at the negotiating table is to agree on peace, to make a compromise, which is inevitable, if he's making money from it? The answer is no. And they can call you bad, me bad, or even very good. But a person at the negotiating table can't agree on peace because war is his source of money. He's hooked on it. It's a dead end. The only solution is to change the government. Hold elections and replace the government. Negotiators should be those with no vested interests to end the war. And only after that, there's nothing more to talk about and no need to dig any deeper. About Umarov, I'm sure he has an American passport. That's the second issue. And the tapes confirm it. What I just said was about peace negotiations. But a person whose main interests are in another country, does he have any interest or motivation to carry out reforms in Ukraine, to want something, to think about any of this? No, the tapes confirm it. They met with Mindich near the Verkhovna Rada in an apartment on Hrushevsky Street, having breakfast or lunch and discussing the budget and where to place their people. That's your whole state right there. And here you have to put aside this whole there's a war going on argument. So what now? Was that a reason to set up a dictatorship? Was that a reason to terrorize your own citizens? Was that a reason to crush freedom of speech? No, that wasn't a reason. These people knew exactly what they were doing and refused to govern the country differently. The current situation is extremely dangerous. Because before, when I said this, they would call me names, insult me, and brand me. But now there are just documents on the table, facts. So what do we do about this? There are people who are against ending the war. You help some military people who are against ending the war. They still believe that Russia can be defeated by military means. They think that those they don't like on YouTube should be dealt with. For example, I've seen posts from one such person. He writes that the SBU should act according to wartime laws, but for some reason he doesn't say why. To deal with them according to wartime laws, either with Umarov or with Mindich. Do you understand? That's why society is in such a bad state now, Elena. Do you know why I'm saying this? This summer, or at the latest in September or October, the point of no return will be reached. After that, there will be irreversible processes in society. People have turned against each other because of propaganda. Now I wonder what's next. The whole country knows everything. And everything is quiet, everything is calm. The world press is silent too. Think about why. About the actions of the military recruitment centers. It is silent. It makes you think. And Ursula is writing a post on X today. She writes, "We're making a drone deal with Ukraine. This is the future. It's all clear. A wonderful business project."
I've already written about this business project today because that's something that immediately catches your eye. These are two parallel worlds. One is collective Europe, which is ready to pay, but it's not clear to whom. And they pay, they help. And no one asks about an audit. No one asks where the money that's being sent is going. I understand very well. I remember when kind Biden came. When Biden comes, Biden will settle things for us. And he would give $1 billion here, $1 billion there. He was just giving it away. Everyone forgot. Thank you. That was his first quid pro quo. Thank you. Comurela 2015. He was the one who blackmailed with $1 billion. And everyone forgot. Everyone forgot that later this money was laundered. And they were embezzled. These billions, which no one knows where they went or what they were used for, because they needed to silence those who spoke out against Biden's son. They forgot about that too. Tell me, how can we break through this lack of understanding among people living in Ukraine? I understand we can keep chipping away at the rock. We can keep going. Try to break it, but the rock still stands. The rock is from a complete lack of understanding, not just about what's happening in Ukraine, but on the globe as a whole, when it comes to geopolitics and interests, where every country has its own interests. But maybe Trump's behavior, no matter what people say, was connected to the fact that he had information, the kind we're just now learning about. I'm 100% sure. Ukraine. That's why he hesitated and didn't want to make any final commitments to Zelensky. He didn't want to deal with Zelensky. So tell people what you think about this and why you think it's impossible to deal with Zelensky. Continuation.
Well, as the first argument, it's what I've already said. At the negotiating table, there's a person who isn't interested in ending the war, and he made that very clear by his behavior. Recently, he disrupted Kushner's visit to Kyiv. Kushner and Vitkov said, "We're going to Kyiv." Zelensky says, "I don't need this. They should come." Well, what else is there to say? With all his actions, as someone rightly said, he basically became the leader of the anti-Trump coalition in the world. That's his mission. He is successfully disrupting negotiations. You made a good point about the rock, and I have an answer to that. The public has now heard about Mindichgate, about all of this. People understand that Zelensky is not going to end the war. But somehow, as much as possible, people are trying to go on with their lives. Because people already just feel doomed, trapped in a harsh psychological pit, in a bubble of propaganda. But when it affects each person directly, for example, the mobilization of women, or mobilization starting at 18 years old, that is, people in Ukraine, in Russia, and everywhere in the post-Soviet space need it to affect them personally, and until that moment, it's not my problem. And when it affects a huge number of people, like now with this outrageous mobilization affecting men, it's already clear to everyone, especially men. As for politics, it means we still have to wait for an even bigger catastrophe. If this isn't a reason, I said this recently on my stream the other day, if all of this isn't a reason to just plainly demand impeachment and end to the war, elections, then what do you want? What do you need to be shown? What do you need to be told? And so I answered myself. It needs to affect everyone directly. People are already unhappy about all this, yes, but they won't react the way they should. It's just wild to me how the president, Zelensky, hasn't commented on this at all. The members of the Ukrainian parliament should have started impeachment procedures. It's written in a very idiotic way. It's almost impossible to carry it through to the end in Ukraine, but it can be started to show that this is actually a presidential parliamentary or parliamentary presidential republic. But that's not happening. So all of this is just one big, how should I put it, collective of corrupt officials. This Zelensky group, and not only them, they are tearing Ukraine apart. I've been saying all this since 2022, everything that's happening today. So what? And what? All this is happening today, and then what?
What? He's just trying to cover for his friends, the president of Ukraine, those he's carving all this up with. But he's trying to punish some of them. The latest events show that he's looking for scapegoats, always forgetting that he could end up being the last scapegoat in this situation. And the Ukrainian people will make some kind of decision. But when? The whole problem is that the Ukrainian people take a long time to get started. They allowed a yoke to be put on their necks and quietly, calmly go to slaughter. Yesterday, I heard the number 40,000 political prisoners mentioned on Lubarsky's show. I went to look for it. I couldn't find such a number in any official sources. So you say that this number exists. I would like to know where this number comes from, what sources it is based on, and who has verified it. Because the figure of 600 political prisoners is mentioned. That's a lot, too. But not 40,000. I really want to know where this number comes from.
This is the original source, Nel Lubarsky. He repeated it on Dubinsky's show. Dubinsky has a team of lawyers working on this. I'll tell you what falls under these numbers. Even if it's not 40 but 20, it's still catastrophic. It's like in a real dictatorial country. New criminal charges were invented at the beginning of the war in Ukraine. That's not counting the ones that existed before, like treason and so on. During the war, they came up with many others. They're trying to persecute my family using some of these charges, just made up ones. I remember when they took my mom. The trials are still ongoing. After a year and a half, nothing has changed. There's no case, you understand. How can it move anywhere? And this is just a tool for pressure. And many people got in trouble for their posts. Recently, a 68-year-old man was sentenced to 6 years in prison because he wrote something unflattering to a friend in a private email conversation. He expressed some sympathy for Russia. I'm not sure of his exact words. It wasn't really anti-Ukrainian, maybe he was just tired of the war, but it was his private opinion in a private conversation. Still, He was imprisoned for that at 68 years old for 6 years. It's basically a life sentence. I heard about this by accident from my subscribers. There are many similar cases in Ukraine, many trials for what people have said or written. These are the people in prison or pretrial detention. That's likely what Dubinsky meant by political prisoners. Besides members of parliament, besides all those prominent people.
Every time you mention Dubinsky's name, they immediately tell you, oh, that's a Russian psyop. Dubinsky, a portrait without embellishment, but he's not exactly squeaky clean either. Initially, he talked a lot, but somehow he ended up in the same Rado, and he joined Zelensky's team, so he knew. That's very Ukrainian. You saw what you bought, now eat it, even if your eyes pop out. He compromised. And this compromise he made ended very badly for him. Because if you're not on the team, if you go against the team will eat you alive.
Yes, but you just cited Lyubarsky's data. That doesn't mean you sympathize with Lyubarsky. So when I cite Dubinsky's data, it doesn't mean I sympathize with him. I've always said and written openly, I'm not a fan at all of what Dubinsky did. Moreover, I'm a staunch opponent. I'm a political opponent of Dubinsky even today. He's in the detention center now, but the posts that appear on his channel about politics, about Ukraine's future actions, his views are 180 degrees opposed to mine. But he's a Ukrainian citizen, a political prisoner who has been in the detention center for 2.5 years, and the trial hasn't started. Why? Because there's no case. Because during a trial, even a fake one, they must present something to the public, like evidence that Dubinsky is a Kremlin agent, but no such proof exists. If they had that, he would have been sent to prison a long time ago. He would have been jailed. They can't do that. That's it. So if we're talking about democracy, as I understand it, a truly proper Ukraine, a democratic one, like any democratic country, even the worst scoundrel should have the same rights and the right to defense as someone who is considered the best in the world. Otherwise, it's no longer a democracy. That's why I can only speak about Dubinsky. Like any other Ukrainian citizen, such as Shufrik, who was recently detained and just released from pretrial detention. They showed that he had some artifacts from World War II, nothing else. Apparently, there doesn't really seem to be much of a case either. Somehow he probably made a deal and they let him go. Do I like Shufrik after that? Of course not. I mean, as a politician.
And tell me, please, what is the role of Ukrainian media in what is happening? I believe that they fully share all the irresponsibility of the authorities. Moreover, they provoke things. People, so that people march in step with them. Basically, they're conditioning them. And every time you hear, but you're lying, they start telling you, well, everyone lies, you lie too. I ask about what? Here's a fact, a fact, a fact. And after that, it's already an axiom. No one needs to say anything. They speak in their own axioms. How do you deal with these phenomena? How can we restore sanity to people who not only have TDS, this hatred for Trump based on the fact that they don't have the information, but someone has also been feeding them this? So how do you talk to these people?
Most of your audience, the people, are not in Ukraine, they're part of the diaspora. So I'll tell them now, my audience already knows what the media is like in Ukraine. Right now, 95% of the media in Ukraine, before the war it was 80%, now it's 5% are still owned by oligarchs. Barely functioning. 95% are controlled by Soros foundations. Controlled by Soros foundations. And they all have the same agenda. They completely ignore the lawlessness of the military recruitment centers, this semi-fascist or outright fascist mobilization, when 10 masked thugs beat one man to death. What do you call that, excuse me? This isn't a Russian man, he's ours, Ukrainian. And they don't notice it. That's it, they're somewhere else, they don't see it at all. They don't write about political prisoners, about political emigrants, about the facts of dictatorship, about obvious repressions. It's as if these topics don't exist. What are corporate media anyway? 5 editors revised the information to suit the owner's interests, fed it to you, and that's how Ukrainians or other post-Soviet people read the newsfeed. He reads the headline, and if it says Elon Musk and Trump are villains, that's exactly what gets into his head. Does he read, check the original translation, compare? Of course not. Well, 90 all of them, 90%. That's how Ukrainian media is. They don't exist, and there's no journalism. All the men working in these media outlets are exempt from mobilization. Speak up and you'll be sent to the front. And a lot of women are like that too. I call it cannibalism. They write, somewhere those military recruitment guys beat a person to death or nearly to death, and they write people in military uniforms. You should specify they are military recruitment officers, not just people in military uniforms. These tricks are used. Maybe they're not recruitment officers, but just bad guys in camouflage. That's the message they're sending.
Honestly, that's just wild to me. It's just wild because the mentality of someone who's lived here for a long time, and when I hear about what's happening there, all that lawlessness, I have to ask, how are you any different from your Eastern neighbor? Because there's tyranny there and now it's tyranny here too? How? I don't know what to call the system that exists in Ukraine right now. We also see and observe how Kyiv is out having fun, how all these cities are out having fun as if it's the last time, how the restaurants are packed, everything is packed, and by the number of Bentleys, Kyiv ranks third in the world. Where is Zim's money coming from? I've been wondering the whole time, where is the money? I see this money, the houses, the villas that this government is building. Here we have very wealthy people building things like that, those who have earned it, who have a lot of money, honestly earned. And they pay taxes. But where did this money come from? You didn't create anything. You didn't do anything. You didn't do anything. And then I see Pritula, who is with United 24. He was raising money for a drone, and now he's investing in American startups. He has sponsors. He makes billions there. He has sponsors. Walmart, for example, that's definitely a lot of money, and the other teams. And no one checks where this startup is. It's registered in California. This is the person who was raising money for drones and who also took a good cut for himself. Not exactly selfless. You see, this discredits any kind of help. When people like that start collecting money, you want to ask them questions, but they won't answer, just make excuses. What should you do in this situation? When someone from Ukraine or America is raising money for their own businesses or their own foundations, the question is, where do you pay taxes from what you've collected or earned? Where did you get your staff? 120 people or even more, like Scottel. How much do you pay them? Well, you understand perfectly well, you live in our country, in this country. You know how business works and you have to report. For every cent you earn, you have to pay taxes.
If we're discussing the Pritula case, viewers should know Pritula isn't a player. Behind Pritula stands the same Soros Foundation, Pinchuk, Soros's best friend in Ukraine, his representative in Ukraine.
He's his partner. He's simply his partner.
Yes, Pritula has family ties with one oligarch, a very influential one, with Kamutinik. But politically, it's more of Soros's line. Who is Pritula without the foundation? I asked my audience this. So who is Pritula without the foundation? A fifth-rate actor, with crude, lowbrow humor on some little Pinchuk channel. Who is this humor even for? I call it trash humor. And now we come to the point that Pritula, on the blood of people and with other people's money, created for himself, or rather this technology created for him, a political rating. When your foundation has billions of hryvnias in turnover, you're immediately under the protection of the intelligence services. You have security, you have a structure, you have everything. They give subtle hints to businesses which are forced to pay up. There were already many questions about the satellite and high prices. But Pritula's social media behavior is threatening, writing things like, guys from military intelligence are about to pay you a visit. He insults people with words I don't even want to repeat on air. It's already been spread everywhere. About me, he writes traitor, meaning a traitor to the state. Go submit the documents and let us know. Show the evidence of state treason.
Then set an example and go to the front.
That's a whole different topic. He has vision problems and I also have severe nearsightedness. And he said he can barely see out of one eye, just like Stenenko. Actually, all of this is just a cover for the Ukrainian deep state. It exists just like in America. It's connected with the Democrats, with all of that. It's a part of the intelligence services. Under this, there's a very complex structure. It's not homogeneous either. And Pritula is one of their fronts. Obviously, of course, he's aiming for a big political position, but it's fair when a person is a nobody thanks to the foundation they raised him into a political figure. If people fall for it, what can I do? I can give as much information as possible and offer an alternative, which I did. But if a huge number of people in Ukraine would claw your eyes out today for Prychula, then how are you going to explain it to them? I already told you common sense has left the chat. And the root of everything we've been discussing for the past half hour, and the root of every one of your questions, that's what it is. Today in Ukraine, if you express even a slightly different opinion, it's not even considered. You'll be insulted, sent away, and that's it. But they can't have a discussion. Let's have one. I've suggested it 1,000 times. I can offer it to Prychula now. Let's do a live stream so nothing gets edited out. An independent moderator. And let's have a debate. You present your point of view and your perspective on Ukraine. I'll present mine. And let people decide. No, there's no discussion. Zelensky completely shut down the debate. Completely. Putin is Zelensky's role model. And the same methodology was used in Ukraine, only at an accelerated pace.
It's actually scary to listen to because when you think about the meaning of what's been said, you feel hopeless. But you must never give up. I can say one thing for sure. Trump just figured this out from the very beginning. At the beginning of 2025, when he came, he figured it out and understood what kind of scheme he was dealing with, because we have like a central intelligence agency that provides all the information on every person. I'm 100% sure that precisely because he knew he couldn't string Trump along. Trump talks a lot. That's the other side of the coin. He shouldn't have talked so much. He shouldn't have made so many promises because people keep reminding him about the 24 hours all the time. These 24 hours kind of undermine trust. But at the same time, we have our own interests and priorities in America and America first. It's been clearly and precisely formed. The Monroe Doctrine was formulated, which appeared in January. And now we are once again convinced when they said that 5,000 troops would be withdrawn from Germany. Everyone they started to protest. They forgot. The first troop withdrawal was from 2012 to 2014, and it was done by Obama. He was withdrawing the troops. Then he slightly restored troop levels. And in 2017, former Secretary Stoltenberg thanked Trump for bringing back the tank brigade that he had withdrawn. A couple more brigades that were withdrawn specifically by Obama. With their revolutions, the color ones indulging Iran, which urgently needed to be paid those billions of dollars in cash that had been sitting there for 40-something years. And Iran was threatening. It was Iran that was threatening. Iran was making threats and the interest had built up there. And so we're talking about the fact that in reality, no one says anything and everyone keeps silent, shifting the blame to Trump. But all Trump did was mention 5,000 being withdrawn from Germany. The ones who were actually withdrawn to Germany in 2020, he just restored the status quo that existed before. Today, or rather yesterday, Secretary of State Rubio had to ask an uncomfortable question directly to Europe live on Fox News during the Hannity program. When we need them to let us use their military bases, there's no answer from them. Then why are we in NATO? You should ask that question. Why do we have billions and billions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars over the years, trillions of dollars, and all these American forces stationed in the region if we can only use the bases when we need them and we're not allowed to do it? This question is pressing, and later Rubio might appear. Rubio is live talking about reconsidering the entire alliance. No more, no less. And there are hints about withdrawing the American contingent of around 100,000 troops from Europe. No more, no less. At the same time, today a meeting took place in Yerevan. European leaders Macron, Starmer, Meloni, von der Leyen, and the others met with Zelensky. And as always, they showed how cool they are. They met in the Washington format, but without America. It's funny. It would be funny if it weren't so sad. Without the Americans, but with warm hugs for Armenia. In Armenia, I want to remind you that they met. I'm not even talking about what they agreed on there. But the very fact of the meeting in Armenia, in that very Armenia, which, along with Putin, was a fellow traveler in the Russian Economic Union and the Collective Security Treaty Organization since 1992, in the so-called Tashkent Pact. That was Armenia. Now their president, Pashinyan, he started to distance himself a little from Moscow. But there's one thing, they met in Yerevan, and in Armenia, there's a Russian military base in Gyumri. And there are always planes there, there's always Russian equipment, and something is constantly flying from there to Iran. And how is America supposed to react to this? How can they go there? In a country where there is a Russian military base with planes and everything, and until 2044 they can't take anything out of there? How can the president of Ukraine, who is at war with Russia, fly there? How can the leaders of EU and NATO countries fly there? For me, these things completely negate everything they do. Either they don't understand, or they're trying to provoke, or they're idiots. What's your opinion?
The question needs to be asked about the war itself. How is it that Zelensky can come to a country where there's a Russian military base and nobody even tries to shoot at him? That means there is a behind-the-scenes agreement about personal safety. Obviously, there is one. Both sides are working together. That's why certain areas of Kyiv where they live aren't being bombed. And Zelensky surely gave the Russians the same promise. That's it. You see, these are the people who make the decisions, and they won't die, nor will their families. But the people who don't make the decisions, the ones on the front lines, they end up as cannon fodder on both sides. That's what I'm suggesting we think about first and foremost. And as for them meeting there, like I said, Trump doesn't call Zelensky P.T. Barnum for nothing. Zelensky is now an illegitimate president who is also acting as a sales manager for the company Firepoint. That's how I see it. He goes around offering his weapons and drones everywhere. He sells them successfully. And that's it. For Europe, it's a good deal. They are trading energy resources with Putin at the same time. They buy cheap drones from Zelensky, made by cheap labor in Ukraine. For them, Ukraine is a country and a buffer between the civilized world and Putin. And that's it. And while they are rearming, as they said, Ukraine is the body armor of Europe, the shield of Europe, and other such nonsense. For me, it's disgusting to call my country a shield, body armor, or a steel porcupine. It's revolting. Nobody asked if people wanted their country to be a steel porcupine. And all the mistakes they've made in their policies, these European leaders, they're just trying to blame it all on Trump, like it's all because of Trump. They constantly keep people afraid, warning that Putin might attack tomorrow. What do you mean Putin will attack? One day they say Putin is about to attack the European Union or the Baltic states, and the next day they say Russia is on the verge of economic collapse and Putin is losing power. So make up your mind, is Russia about to attack you and fight on two fronts at the same time, or is it falling apart? So it's all just absurd. It's just a conspiracy. That's why the European media doesn't cover it.
Tell me, are there any reasonable, sane voices left in Ukraine who aren't imprisoned yet, but who can still speak the truth so that Ukrainians understand what we're talking about? Because for the second day now, and now the third, it's all about Sternenko, Praitula, Karas, Mikhailova, Podolyak, Beletsky, Berlinska, Monova, and all these names. And then we hear about the mysterious Andriy and Vova from Pindich's tapes. We understand that so many questions arise for people who are trying to figure out these issues. Who are all these people? Why are they not being prosecuted? And why would people allow themselves to be violated like that, as the Ukrainian people did? By the government that came to power in 2019.
First of all, there is no voice in Ukraine and there can't be one. It's physically impossible there, just like in Russia. The answer to the second question is the same. You're now asking how long people there will endure or how long Russians will tolerate Putin. It's the same thing. When you build a dictatorship, there comes a moment, a kind of point of no return, after which people can't do anything anymore. They can't take to the streets or participate in political life, and there's no freedom of speech. That's what Putin did in Russia. Why weren't there any major protests against the war in Ukraine? Only a handful of show business stars who left Russia, like Pugacheva and Makarevich, said something about it while everyone else supported it and is making money from it. It's the same in Ukraine. Pop stars support Zelensky, but completely ignore what's happening in the country. You see, for them, it's good money business like collecting donations and organizing an overseas tour at the same time. And in general, that's just how things are in our post-Soviet society. You have to keep a low profile, not stand out. Today, the authorities are like this, so we support them. Yesterday, they weren't for Yanukovych. Today, they're for Zelensky. And tomorrow, they'll support anyone if it's profitable. The technology is the same. Putin is Zelensky's role model. Nothing is different, and people are just as oppressed as in Russia. Now, it's very hard to change this. Very hard, but possible.
Tell me it's hard to change, but possible. Have there been any attempts?
Well, I'm making an attempt.
You're making an attempt from here. Nothing threatens you here. Thank God you're here. There are people sitting there and they're afraid to say a word. Then I read the comments under what I write and say, for example, I always emphasize I helped and I still help. But there comes a moment when people look at me like I'm crazy and ask, who are you helping? I mean, people who are suffering directly because of family, loved ones, and friends. And they tell you that's them spitting on you. I say that's on their conscience. It's not on mine. Here's Denis Yelisevich, who came and is shouting his heart out for the country that doesn't hear him. How many people do you think will hear and understand you when you speak? Because sometimes it seems to me that you're speaking Swahili to them.
Hundreds of thousands of people in Ukraine support me. Not threatened is a very relative concept in today's world. My family lives in Ukraine. We discussed my mother and a criminal case was opened against her, so it's all relative. And especially when the country is run by people like, for example, Putin or Zelensky. What they are capable of has already become clear. So all of this is relative. Hundreds of thousands of people in Ukraine support me. And the only thing Zelensky is lacking compared to Putin is that Putin has his own resources while Zelensky does not. No one except the US and China can tell Putin what to do. But in principle, many people can tell Zelensky what to do. Not many want to, but many can. And Zelensky lives on loans. He doesn't have his own resources. That's all. And that's why someday the stars will align. Look, under US pressure, Yermak was fired. They should have finished off the regime. And back then, people needed to see some examples to gain courage and come out. The oligarchs should have joined the game. It doesn't work that way in Ukraine. That's the point. There are few real rebels, so no true leaders. It's necessary.
When the US insisted back in September 2024 that Markarova should be removed, what did Zelensky do? He pinned the Order of St. Anna on her. Can you even tell anyone about this? You spat in the face of the Americans, you spat in the face of the Republicans. Johnson demanded it. Johnson is the Speaker of the House of Representatives. They interfered in the American elections as much as they could. And still it was like water off a duck's back. So how can you explain to people that in America they definitely don't want to do business with them? I don't know who else wants to, although there are whole demonstrations going on there now. They come try to set up foundations, United for Ukraine. I understand people have good intentions. But the question is, what is it with, and who are you planning to work with on that? I understand who you plan to work with on that, with the Americans who are here. But who are you going to help if this money, all of it that will be transferred, won't reach the people who are supposed to receive it? That's just how I feel. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But I have this feeling that it's like an ice hole.
Are you talking about help at the state level or from people like you?
It's not just about help from people. It's about help at the state level, lobbying for Ukraine's interests. I want to ask which Ukraine's interests exactly and whose? What interests in Ukraine? To drive out, to end the war, to drive out the Russians? Let's be realistic. How can this be done now? I'm in favor of finishing them off as much as possible. But when we talk about reality now, I really want to see how that would work. I want to hear a plan for ending the war. Then they tell me about returning to the 1991 borders. But today, that's just a pipe dream.
No, today they don't say that anymore. Today we've gone through such an evolution. At first it was the 1991 border, then, as he said, the plan for resilience, then a dignified peace. In short, his wording kept changing all the time. In the end, obviously, it's all a sham. Nobody is actually planning to make peace. And as you correctly noted, there is no clear plan. Today, a Ukrainian lives without knowing at all what we're doing or where we're going. They're told that Putin needs to be hit hard enough to sit down and agree to separate along the current line of demarcation. But I look at Russia's economic indicators, I know what's happening at the front, but that won't happen along the current line of demarcation. And President Trump arrives with Kushner and Vitkov. There's a specific plan that 18% of Donbas that we control. There's a lot that can be discussed and done there. You know about the free trade zone and various other compromise options. Compromise options. Of course, Ukraine should make greater concessions. Rather, it will make greater concessions than Russia, since Russia is winning. Let's be honest, unfortunately. And then the Ukrainian Prosperity Fund of $800 billion, security guarantees that will be ratified by Congress. This is no joke. This is no joke. No, that's not suitable.
And as for the security guarantee, the Ukrainian press and Ukrainian public figures are completely silent. A security guarantee specifically from the United States of America. I want to remind you about the 100-year treaty signed with Britain last year. Have you heard anything about how Britain is fulfilling it and what it is doing? Did it protect the Ukrainian ports, and how did it protect them? I'm just curious. Maybe there's something I don't know. Well, Carney decided to give $200 million. And everyone says, oh, thank you, Carney. But the fact that NATO is falling apart piece by piece because it's not paying as it should. And the US, 62% of the budget is paid to NATO. The question arises, why should American taxpayers pay for all this? That's what Rubo was talking about. He just said out loud what 1 million Americans are thinking.
Well, it's very hard to explain this to people. I gave them numbers about NATO, about contributions to NATO, and in general explained that America wants Europe to return to the basic values of Western civilization. There are some troubling attempts to put pressure on free speech in Europe. Right now, they have taken to interfering in elections in countries of the European Union and beyond. I mean, that's not right. What scares me about all this? Right now, they are criticizing Putin. To criticize Putin, you need moral superiority over him, which we lack. But when you act using the same methods as Putin, it just doesn't look right. Putin interferes in elections. Putin has crushed freedom of speech, and you're already trying to do the same. And then Trump and Rubio, and remember Vance's Munich speech? That's exactly what it was about. They categorically reject this. That's the only issue here. Trump is imposing tariffs. What did you expect? Donald Trump Jr. put it well. America has stopped being an idiot with a checkbook. How was it treated all these years? An idiot with a checkbook. We need something. You have lots of money, so here's a check for everyone. Trump ended that, which is just common sense. And just try to explain that. Right away, you're called pro-Russian, you're this and that. Elena, do you know what I'm really pushing for above all? For an alliance between Ukraine and the United States, at least roughly following the Israeli model. Ukraine will have a better chance to align itself with the United States.
Strategic partnership.
Yes.
Strategic partnership. Because actually that would be a very good model.
Of course.
Because Ukraine is now in a position where it has something to offer. But with this government, it's unclear what to offer. The whole problem is that they never leave power. That's the constant. I came to you to settle forever. They came to usurp power forever. This is called usurpation of power. They say, we are at war. There are no elections during wartime. Well, then they'll come up with something else. They'll come up with something else. The Constitution gives the Ukrainian president the right to hold office for 5 years, no matter what. And they're telling you fairy tales. So the Constitution's guarantor is violating it.
And who in Ukraine is pushing for elections? Only me, pro-Russian. Can you imagine? In a supposedly democratic country, I don't want snap elections. I don't want to overthrow Zelensky. I don't want a revolution. Hold the elections as scheduled. You're pro-Russian. So wait, are you fighting for democracy then? Do you want democracy? You know what all these pseudo-patriots actually get tripped up on? Tell me, what country do you want Ukraine to be like, ideally? Let's say the war ends tomorrow. What country should Ukraine resemble? And at best, they'll start telling you America, Switzerland, but all their arguments are Afghanistan, Iran, Syria. It doesn't add up at all. So you want the person you like to speak. If you don't like someone, put them against the wall. We don't have to hold elections. Shut your mouth. Don't ask questions. Branding people isn't how things work in a democracy. And all of this, that's what they keep pointing to. And for every such action, narrative, or thesis, they call it pro-Russian, this, that, whatever. But time shows who was right and who was wrong. And these fairy tales about we'll get Crimea back. We won't get Crimea back. I said this at the end of 2022. Immediately, I'm called pro-Russian. But I like it when I propose some reform or talk about something. This has already happened 3 times. And some NGOs are happily writing nasty things about me. There's a Russian-speaking blogger there. Yeah, like it's a crime to be Russian-speaking. There are pro-Russian narratives there. I look into the structure of this organization. Some similar structures, the same Soros foundations. There's a war against a giant force. It's not really about Zelensky. He's not a key player. Powerful forces back him. And let people think about that.
I understand you very well. I just know some additional details. I don't want to talk about them right now. You know, everyone has their own piece of information. It's just very hard for all of us to come together and piece it all together into one picture. I listened to Lyubarsky yesterday. I hadn't listened to him for 2 years. I listened to him yesterday. If he, who spent 6 months in Ukraine, said that maybe it's time to shut down this project, he's already so fed up with it, he had some kind of illusions. Illusions. And every time reality shatters an illusion, at that moment you remember why you left so many years ago. And every time you tell yourself nothing has changed over these years, it's only gotten worse. Let me ask you one last question. Who do I have to choose from? Even if there are elections? Is there even one candidate you can choose? At least put someone up so people can go vote for them.
First, people should forget about all the names in the polls and those previously involved in Ukraine's politics. Second, if real democratic elections are held without stupid preliminary conditions, fees, and other nonsense that they've come up with and are trying to implement, then people will have the opportunity to choose the person who truly represents their interests. If real democratic elections are held, there will be many new candidates like that. I won't name any names. It's pointless since there's no campaign happening. But if real elections are held, that will definitely happen. Absolutely. And Trump set a condition for Zelensky to announce elections by June 15, by mid-June. This condition has lasted several months. Zelensky's visit to Mar-a-Lago involved a very unpleasant conversation. I know this for sure. And as we can see, he's just blatantly going against Trump. Let's wait for this so-called deadline and see what happens.
Yes, there's just a month and a week left. I'm really looking forward to it because right now I'm waiting to talk about the amount of nasty things, the amount of crap that's about to be thrown at Trump with boosted bots and the entire accusatory machine of the government that's currently crushing Ukraine. Don't get it twisted. There are personal selfish interests involved. When there are selfish interests, no one talks about patriotism anymore. Let me remind you what I wrote about today once again brought up the words of the third president of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, about the tree of liberty, which must be watered with the blood of patriots and tyrants. Subtitles by Dima Torzok. Only patriots shed their own blood and water this tree themselves. And tyrants earn their dividends from the blood of patriots. Denis, thank you very much. I think we should meet more often and do this kind of cross-analysis. To do an analysis, because each of us has our own perspective. When we take this point of view and combine them, we get something more accurate and better. with which, you can melt people's hearts. You're watching the Continent Channel. Denis Yelisevich is an honest, decent, Russian-speaking person. This is considered a flaw for him, living in America and fighting for Ukraine. He doesn't need power. He needs freedom for his country. You're watching the Continent Channel. We also need freedom in our country, in Ukraine, and all over the world, so that it would be easier for all of us to breathe. Bye.
Thank you.